Kramer Says. Be part of the show at CramerSez.com. Interact on Twitter at CramerSez. Now.
I guess we're on. The Open didn't open all the way. Hey, it's Kramer. We were still having some technical issues with some of this video stuff. Welcome for joining the show. Lines are open at 877-619-3899, taking your calls. The day after we saw Trump indicted and how all of that turned out. What are your thoughts? Where do we go from here? I think that if you listen to Twitter tonight, there's a number of lives that they're doing there that you can drop in on and listen to people from around the country that are asking the exact same questions that you are. What do we do? What is leadership going to do? When is leadership going to act? When are they going to step forward? Because what's happening to Trump is the exact same thing that will happen to us if we don't get our act together. If we don't start holding our politicians accountable. Demand that they do what they're supposed to do. Demand that they protect our rights, that they protect our freedoms. That's what they're there for. That's their only job. Politicians don't have any other job than to protect our rights, our freedoms. Not getting rich, not building buildings. They have no role other than to protect our rights and freedoms. And if they're not doing that, then it's time, as the American people, you hold them accountable. Well, Kramer, I don't know how to do that. I'm just one person. Yep. You got a friend that feels the same way? Okay. Now you've got a team. It only takes one other person to become a team. You realize that, right? And if nobody else around you will do it, you've got to get disgusted to the point where you will do it yourself. An old coach of mine gave me a great line or a great way to look at things. What he told me is he said, Kramer, he says, when you look around and you can't find the leader that you're looking for, become that leader. Become that leader and be the one that steps up and starts doing it regardless of what anybody else thinks, what anybody else says, or the actions that they take. You do it because it needs to be done and nobody else is doing it. And here's the thing that I found about leadership that just amazes me. Leaders start walking. It's followers that come in behind. They won't follow unless someone leads. But Kramer, I might get in trouble. You're already in trouble. Your freedoms are at risk. And you think that there's somebody in D.C. or your state capital or even your hometown that is fighting harder for your freedoms than you are. They're not. They are not doing that. They're doing what's best for them. We've seen it time and time again. The politicians, George Santos, for example. George Santos is one of those guys that's decided, you know what? It's easier to lie, cheat, and steal and get into office and never be held accountable than it is to work and have to perform and produce a product or produce something worthwhile in the public sector. People in the public sector hold you accountable. We don't hold our people in Congress accountable. Look at the number of times that Charlie Rangel got elected time and time again after he was knowingly a criminal. How many do we have in Congress that don't pay their taxes? They'll send the IRS to your house, but they don't care about their own deal because nobody's going to hold them accountable. And here's how it happens. You don't have to do everything the left does to play the game. But there's a lot of tools that they put in the tool belt that you have to wrap your head around and say, you know what? We're going to have to adopt some of these tactics of the left. Oh, Kramer, we don't be like them. You mean in power? You mean telling you what you have to do? What your children learn, what medications you have to put into your body to be able to work or travel, that was just a couple of years ago. That was a test run, folks. They wanted to see how quiet you would be about it. You don't like what your state rep is doing. You don't like what your congressional member is doing. You don't like the leadership in your state. And, well, Kramer, I live in California. It doesn't matter. You show up at their home. Do what the fucking left does. Have some fucking balls about yourself. Gather your friends and neighbors. Go and make it unlivable for them in their own homes, in their own neighborhoods, among their friends. It's even better if you wait for them to have a wedding or a social event where they've got all the people they want to impress. And that's when you and your friends show up and you've got your noisemakers and you've got your bullhorns and you stand out in the streets and you do what you have the authority, according to the Constitution, to do. You hold them accountable by going to where they live and redressing your grievances against the government. They won't meet you in Congress. They won't meet you at the state capitol. They don't want to see you because you're the squeaky wheel. You're the one that gets them in trouble, makes them feel bad. That's who you are. Lines are open at 877-619-3899. People keep asking me the exact same question over and 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 over again. Kramer, what the fuck do we do? Every night I keep telling you what you do. You get involved. I can't tell you everything that you got to do on a daily basis, but what you do is you pick something that's passionate to you, something that you're passionate about. Is that is it the school board? Is that what you're passionate about? Kids and education. Is that what you're, or taxes, or the city council, the things that they're doing? Are you passionate about any of it? Does any of it concern you? Because if it doesn't, don't come yelling at me saying, Kramer, they're stealing my rights. They're stripping our rights away from us. They're not stripping shit away from you. You're giving it. You're giving it. You're giving the rights. You're giving them up. You're handing them over. It's you. It's not anybody else. It's you. They're not taking them. You're giving them. Do you know how I know that you're giving them? Because there's no fight. You're not standing up and saying, hey, listen, you've got to answer to me. You've got to answer to we the people, not to the special interest groups. They're not we the people. Your voters are. Well, these people are constituents as well. Yeah, but they're trying to use the system to get my dollars out of my pocket and put them in their pocket. They're trying to take my liberties and my freedoms and utilize them against me. We would have never thought in this country 20 years ago that speaking out would get you in trouble, that making a joke would get you in jail for 20 years. Oh, Kramer, that's not happening in this country. Absolutely is. There's a young man right now who made a meme on Twitter telling people to vote by text. It was a joke. It was clearly a joke, but they've used that joke against him. His First Amendment right, they've used that against him to say, hey, listen, you said something that could interfere with our elections. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton and her 30,000 emails, that doesn't have anything to do with the election in 2016. What Comey did days before the election has nothing to do with the election. What we saw time and time again, Peter Strzok, Page, the rest of them, they're not in trouble. They're not in trouble for election interference. The 51 intelligence officials that signed a letter saying that Hunter Biden's laptop, it has all the appearances of a Russian information campaign. All the appearances. Days before the election. And Joe Biden himself, in the 22 midterms, hiding the fact that the confidential documents had been found in his home. They had been found in his home previous to the 22 midterms. They hid that information. Is that election interference? I say it is. If a meme written as a joke, utilizing your First Amendment rights, can get you 20 years in this country now, folks, we've already lost the fucking war. It's time to fucking stand. It's time to start playing by the rules of the left, the way they're playing the game. We're playing the game. We're just not playing by the right rules. We're playing by our rules, trying to do the right thing, law-abiding. We'll count on the judicial system to take care of everything for us. And then we find out we've got corrupt DAs. We've got corrupt judges. The corruption is through and through. These are all friends of each other. They're not going to allow each other to go to jail. It's just like you and your friends when you were in high school. Teacher comes in, parents come in. Did you guys do this over the weekend? No, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. And you guys all cover for each other. At work, something gets broken, something gets stolen, whatever. And you cover for each other. Because you don't want to get fired. You don't want to lose your job. Well, do you think they're any different? Do you think that these politicians are angels? I don't. I don't at all. Phone lines are open at 877-619-3899. 877-619-3899. Here's what we're going to do. This video here is one of my favorites. It's by Ray Dalio. He's the founder of Bridgewater and Associates. They are the world's largest hedge fund. I don't know Ray Dalio's politics. It really doesn't matter. When you tell the truth, your politics don't matter to me. When you're not trying to push an agenda, your politics don't matter to me. It's only when you're trying to impact my life with your decisions that I want to know where the fuck your alliances lie. But here in this case, Ray Dalio has put together a great piece showing us where we are and where we're going and how we got here. We'll play that right after this phone call. You're live with CramerSez. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, New York City, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, how is it? You're in behind enemy lines. How is it in Brooklyn?
Man, it's very treacherous, very, very head on a swivel. I'll tell you that. The other day I was picking up the kids from school. Saw this hipster walk by and had one of those Trans Lives Matter shirts on, and I was like, holy shit, we are in the battlefield.
Yep, this is it. People don't realize that the war actually started 6 years ago when Trump first ran. That's when they started the attack on the American people.
I agree. I actually think like when he went to it completely threw him off. I think why all this is happening now is like they're trying to play catch up because he threw such a monkey wrench into the works. It's like it's now or never right now. It's like if they don't get it done now because they know they're not going to make it. If we make it to 2024 and there's actual elections allowed to happen, they know that they're done.
Right.
Like that's it. Like everyone sees what's going on. Like there's no hiding it anymore.
Well, let me ask you the question.
We're
talking about the problem. Okay, we've been talking about the problem amongst ourselves for the last 2.5 years. What's the solution? What do we do? What's next? I know what my solution is, but what's yours? What do you think we have to do next?
As in terms of like policy wise?
Well, we the people. Because the people in power are not going to change. They're not going to do the right thing. They have the option to. They've decided not to. So what do we, as we the people, what do we do next? We know what our options are. How do we enact those? What do we do next?
Well, my opinion, and I mean, it's very blunt and brutal. Two things we can do. We can either start running for political offices, whether it be small, large, community, whatever have you, or just stop paying taxes if you can work off the books. Because if they can't control your money, they can't control anything. But then again, they're crashing the economy so fast that they're pretty much pushing this digital currency. So
I don't even know if you heard. I don't even know if you heard the founder of the Cash App. Have you ever used it?
Murder in San Francisco. I heard about that.
Yeah,
that's insane. I mean, and not only that, it's gotten so bad to that point, and yet London Breed still won't change policy, and now she needs federal help to bail her out because like, she has no money to hire new law enforcement. It's like, are you serious? Like, you still haven't woken up yet. You know, I mean, with Boudin getting impeached, I don't even know how Gascon survived his recall. Like, I would really. Well,
I think we all know how they're surviving these recalls. I think we all know how they're doing it. Chicago is one of the most corrupt election.
Did you hear about
there's
Johnson?
no one.
He won.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
And now it's like when nothing happens or it gets worse, you just have to look in the mirror and suck it up. Like that's it. You have to take the L because you knew damn well where he was coming from. You had Paul Vala. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, like I switched parties years ago. Like after college, Once I went through that experience, I had to take sociology for like a humanities course. That's it. Like I went to my political party to independent, and after that, I saw this happening. Went straight to Republican. You know, I saw this happening before. Like we came from South America. You can't sell us the bullshit. We've already lived through this. You know what I mean?
Well, let me ask you this: so when you switched parties, did you get a lot of pushback from friends and people around you? Did they to call you a traitor and so on?
Not really. You know, they try to, but it's kind of hard because unfortunately, and this sounds kind of sad, like all I do is kind of like read and try to get informed. So it's like when you try to take an argument with me, it's like it's kind of hard because like, you know, when you don't know your facts and I completely crush your point, it's just like you're there stuck on stupid.
Well,
so
and what happens
like,
then, right? You ended up just getting called racist a lot, right? At the end of the conversation.
No, not even because how are you going to call a Hispanic guy named Jose from South America racist?
They don't care. They don't care. You're a racist. You're a phobic. You're transphobic. You're homophobic. You're misogynist. You're xenophobic.
No, but
those are all those things. That's what I'm saying. That's what they label you with. As soon as you win the conversation, as soon as you win the debate, that's what they label you with.
Here's the food for thought and the scary part. Well, not the scary part for me, but like where I feel like they're gonna have to pull all the stops. It's just like the amount of people that are shifting to the right and like actually backing Trump, like not even the rhinos. It's very it's very alarming because I mean I could understand if it's like, you know, from someone from South or Central America, you know, because like we've been through it, we've lived through it, we've witnessed it.
Right.
But when you're having people from like the Caribbean, for like the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, shifting, you know, because a lot of these people are like middle class people that worked hard to achieve what they had. Now, when you see them switching parties, that's when it's cause for concern because it's just like they've never went through like what we went through, like, you know, like we neighbor Venezuela, or like, you know, we've seen the influx and how it affected our country. Like they never went through that as hard as we did. So when you have that kind of migration, like, you know, from that part of the region switching over to the right side of politics, that's when it's like I think they're realizing that, and this is why it's all going to shit because now I mean like Finland just joined NATO and like they're really pushing for Ukraine to get joined into NATO because it's like right now they have the Trump indictment's not going to work. Or anything else is not going to work. So it's like, what else do they have left to kind of like steer us or push us into what they want us to do? So the next thing you do is World War III, because that's exactly what's going to happen.
Right. They've got to get us into something. Right. They've got to get us into something where it's an emergency, and all of a sudden, hey, folks, it's an emergency. It'll be no different than the pandemic. We're going to lose more rights. They're going to disallow us to move across the country because they don't want us. Hey, we're at war. We don't know if there's a Chinese in here or the Russians are in here. So we're going to limit you to where you can move so we can keep a track on the enemy because they have to move. That's the mentality, folks. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but I was talking to someone earlier today, and they said that, you know, because in reality, I don't really see a lot, because I mean, you know what the numbers are for the military. They're so low that it's actually now becoming a national security situation.
Yep.
Like I don't really see a lot of people signing up to fight for this guy. Especially
well, do you know why?
Afghanistan.
Do you know why? Because 77% of the young people in our nation that are of military age, 77% are not qualified to go to the military. They can't meet the criteria.
You're absolutely right about that. I can't believe I forgot to mention. No, but you're absolutely right. Another thing too that when I was talking, this guy did he's retired military. We were having this conversation today. And it's like, I don't see people signing up to join and fight for this guy. And then he said, I'm pretty sure they're going to reenact the draft and they're going to start pulling from red states to start dwindling the numbers.
Yep.
And I mean, like, come hell to high water. I'm like, shit my ass to prison because I'm not going to fight.
I ain't go. I'm not doing it.
Crack banging hookers. Yeah, no, absolutely not. Now, if the fight comes here in the home front, absolutely. But you're not going to ship me off to fight while your son's out there smoking crack on my back while I'm risking my life. Hell no, I just send me to prison and I'll risk my own life in prison. Fuck it, but I'm not going to go out there to get shipped out.
Well, and
I'm sorry.
That's what I think the American people don't get, is they don't understand that just like Vietnam, we go into war, these congressmen and these senators, their kids aren't going off to war.
Exactly, yeah. They're quick to ship you off.
Right.
Poor and the middle class schmuck, but they won't send his sons, their grandsons, and nieces. Why don't you send them off? Why doesn't Biden send his crackhead son over there? I mean, that's his mess, right? Let him go clean it up. Why don't you send him over there? Of course not. Why would he do that, though? No, of course not. He's not going to do that.
No.
You know?
So again, I go back to what's the answer? Do you see what I'm calling for? I'm calling for going to the homes of these people where they live and holding them responsible, showing up at 10, 11 o'clock at night, making their lives miserable, doing exactly what the left does, but instead of going into towns and cities and burning and looting, is that we hold the people that are making these decisions responsible. What Maxine Waters said, I agree that we should follow her lead. We should make them feel very uncomfortable everywhere they go. Do you agree?
And you know what? You touched on such a good point, because that was and God damn, I wish I would have thought about this. I'm sorry, I'm cursing on the radio.
No, you're all right. You're all right.
Because I was listening to the Dan Bongino podcast, and he was stating, and he has such a solid point. When you go vote, and this year or next year, if your candidate does not support for holding these police politicians responsible or holding them accountable for everything they've done, do not vote for them. Because right now, Alvin Bragg has just opened the precedence for that to happen now. So now, Clinton, Obama, Biden, Pelosi, Mayorkas, hold them all accountable, because now we're going to play tit for tat. You wanted to start this? Let's play. That's it. You change the rules of the playing field. Now we're gonna play. Now we're gonna play your rules.
You want to tango? We'll play by your rules. We'll do this. We'll do exactly what you're doing.
But the thing, I want to touch on your point, because you made such a really good point about reciprocating like what the left does. So what they don't understand, and I don't know why they're under this facade, but the thing is that you and I both know this. From what you sound, you grew up poor, and so did I. You know what I mean? So it's we know how violent nature can be, and how cold the suburban areas can be. It's survival of the fittest. You and I both know this. So what I understand is that when they're calling for this chaos and information, et cetera, and the thing is that the elite are very few. They're 1%, right? When you have the masses, which are the 95 or 99.9%, whatever percentages. What makes you think that when shit hits the fan, that you're going to be safe in your little home? Would you think that your little 20 group security is really going to help you while there's a whole town outside of your house looking to break into your house and steal your shit because my child is crying in starvation? I don't know, bro. We're going to get your shit since you wanted for this. Take your food, and I'm going to go feed my kids with this.
We've already seen. Let me jump in. We've already seen, to your point, we've already seen how quickly things devolve. We've seen cities over the last 15, 16 years that every time that someone gets shot, every time the police, step out of line or whatever, they go into the streets, and I'm talking everybody. I'm not talking about BLM and Antifa. I'm talking about across the country. We've seen it time and time again over the last 20 years. And here's the thing. They tear apart a city. They tear apart a city or a region of the city within 2 to 3 days, where all the food stores are destroyed. All the stores where you get your goods in your community are gone within just days, because that's the first thing that'll happen. That will, to your point, when the shit hits the fan, everything that you rely on a daily basis, your gas station, your grocery store, delivery of food, whatever you want, and your water running and cell towers working and electricity working, all of that stuff will not work. You're done.
Perfect example of Sri Lanka. Look what happened in Sri Lanka. When everything went to shit, that guy had to leave on a boat. I saw them running to the port. You see, when shit hits the fan, no one is safe, and that's what they're not understanding. When the dollar collapses, what are you going to pay that security detail with? When the dollar isn't worth, when the dollar is worth as much as toilet paper, we think they're going to stay there and work for you and protect you while their family could possibly be getting hurt or they could be breaking into their houses. They're going to leave you there. So I don't understand why these elites keep thinking that it's not going to affect them. No one is safe.
You're right.
No one is safe.
You're 100% right. Yep.
Now, another point that I wanted to touch on, besides Sri Lanka, also France, what's happening in France. Everything, they're having delays for days. Well, not days, weeks. And they're not even showing that, And now here's another thing I want to touch on, because I remember last week you were on a podcast saying about TikTok. Now, I agree with both you and Bricklayer, right? Right. Now, I feel that Instagram and Facebook is a bigger threat than TikTok. TikTok just follows the algorithm. the reason, but however, I agree with you that we should ban it. Now, here's why. It's not because of like like what kids are watching, etc. Because we need to reciprocate. We want to get this country back and back to bring value to that dollar. Let's reciprocate. China didn't want Facebook and Instagram there. Okay, so we're not going to take TikTok out of the United States. You guys didn't want to let Amazon go in China, so because they had Alibaba. All right, so that's how we're gonna play tit for tat. All right. Okay. So what happened to COVID? You don't want to release information? Okay, no problem. 100% tariffs, and we're going to increase the shipping charge.
Yep.
And so we get the information we need. And then if we find out that they were responsible, all that land that they bought here,
confiscated. Take it all.
The property. Yep, that's it. Have a good day.
Take it all.
You still owe us money? Okay, no problem. Let's start working off that debt. Bomb. All right.
Yep.
Companies that are over there, you know what? Let's increase the shipping charges so high that it's not even worth for them to ship it. Let them come back. We'll give you a tax break, and not only that, look how much money you save in shipping. Bring everything back home. All right.
Right. I agree with you.
Let's start drilling. Let's start selling the oil. And guess what? We're only taking dollars. You don't have dollars, you can't buy oil. Sucks for you. Have a good day. And that's it. And not only that, we undercut Russia because that's what we were doing before. That's how we got.
Right.
That's how we got Europe to pay the 2% because they were scared of Russia. They were shorting us our money to buy Russian oil at that high charge at that high price.
And do you remember? Do you remember what they did to Trump when he told them all of this? What did they do to Trump when he told them?
Yeah, they were laughing at him. I don't see them laughing now.
Nope.
I don't see them laughing now. They're not laughing anymore, right? Yeah, you fucking jerk. Well, there you go. Oh,
yep.
I'm so sorry.
You're all right. We're on the internet, so you can say whatever the fuck you want to say. How's that?
Yeah. So, yeah. Thanks. I'm sorry, man. I get very excited.
You're all right.
It's very aggravating. But you see, that's how we're going to play. All right. Because that's how we got NATO to pay that 2%. Besides that, they were giving us the shaft and showing us our money to buy Russian oil at top dollar. Right. Like same thing what's happening with Japan now. Now we're going to undercut Russia because the thing is that we don't realize if we were still pumping oil and selling oil to Europe, Russia would have never started as well because they didn't have the money to start it.
Yep. Yep.
Wars cost money.
I don't know if that's 100% true that they wouldn't have started it because Putin
plays a factor though.
Right. Putin it was the perfect time, right? Trump's gone, Biden's in, weak leader, US isn't going to do anything. He's going to step forward, do what he's going to do, and it just happened to be that he was enriched at the same time because Europe had to buy his oil. With all of that being said, we look at why he's doing it. And Noam Chomsky just came out the other day and said very bluntly, he said, Russia is doing what they're doing because of what Obama did in 2014 by overthrowing the democratically elected government of Ukraine. And then they wanted to put their own guys in so they could install NATO. Well, we have an agreement with Russia from 1940, I think 1948, something like that, 1946, somewhere in that ballpark, where we said, hey, listen, and there's the Minsk agreement, right? We're done. NATO is not going to push up to Russia's doorstep. Obama and the rest of the elite said, nope, we're going to break that agreement, and we're going to put our missiles and our troops and right on Russia's doorstep. We're going to violate the agreement that we made after throwing over this government. Here's the thing that I think. I think we're in a lot worse trouble than people realize.
No, you're right. You're 1,000% right.
It's like they've got a credit card on them, right? And it looks like they're living the life, but that credit card only has $7 left on it. It had $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion or whatever, but they've slid that thing so many times, and they haven't paid the bills that they're supposed to pay. We're talking about this new infrastructure bill.
About it, cut it off.
Right.
Yep.
And when it happens, think about the situation that our country is currently from just the infrastructure. Just infrastructure. They passed a new bill, $1.9 trillion. Only 9% of it went to actual infrastructure. So these are some of the other issues. That's it. It's all pork. It's making people in this country rich. So again, how do we stop it? What do we do next? Do you agree with some people have called for a day of vengeance, right? What the trannies are trying to do right now. Should we do that? Then people go, well, if you do that, then they'll use it against you like January 6th. Here's my thing. And this is the question I want you to answer as bluntly as you can.
That could be dangerous.
Okay, here we go.
Go ahead.
If you're afraid of your government, that they might come after you if you exercise your rights, isn't that the time right then that you exercise your rights at the loudest possible? Isn't that when you do it?
Yeah. Yeah, because at that point, what else do you have to lose? What, wait to be Sri Lanka, now you're starving?
Exactly.
I mean, honestly, you want my honest opinion?
Give it to me.
We need to go full France on steroids. Everybody.
I agree.
Everybody.
I agree.
That's
why they're not letting us see it. That's why they're not showing what's happening in Paris and throughout France they're not showing what's happening in South Africa. They're not showing what's happening in Brazil. They're not showing anywhere on the planet where people are standing up because they know what will happen next.
Wait, Kramer, hold on. That's another thing I want to ask you. You got to start posting these on IG, man, because I want to catch up. But I love your podcast, man. Like it's like I like some of my information I get from your podcast, and then I research that, and that's how I build more and more. I guess I build up my database to argue with you. You know what I mean? So
right.
I know you don't like IG, but you got to do me a favor, bro.
Right.
Post it up. But what was I going to say? What people are understanding is that I just want to touch on your point. We are in a worse shape because right now Mexico is seriously considering joining BRICS.
Yep.
But here's the kicker: Iran and Saudi Arabia just made a peace deal. Guess who brokered it? China. Now China is trying to talk Saudi Arabia instead of to ditch the dollar and take the yuan for oil. Once that happens, we're in the royal world.
We're fucked.
Shit.
We're fucked. We're fucked.
At that point, just take your $100 bills and wipe your ass.
Burn them. Light your
that's
cigars with them. It's over. And they know that. And that's why they're trying to get these CBDCs done. Excuse me. They're trying to get those taken care of through the Fed. And the day it crashes, it's going to happen on Friday. They've already told us how they're going to do it. It's going to be a Friday. Yeah. All the banks are going to be closed. Don't worry. You'll be taken care of. We've got resources. If you don't have any food, we'll get you taken care of. But the next few days, we'll tell you what's going to happen. And we're going to roll out this new program. And you're going to have to sign up. If you want any of your money back, you're going to have to sign up. And by the way, this new sign up thing, it's kind of like the vaccine passport.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to comply with certain regulations before you could sign this and we can release your funds. Of course it is. Why not? Right. But look, here's the thing. Here's what's going to break your news. Let's go back to the Matrix, right? They already have, for the big six banks, they already have a pilot program in place for when that happens.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's already part of the design.
Well, it was what I was talking to one of the callers about last night, and thanks for your phone call. We're going to move on to know the callers, but it was one of the phone calls that we took last night where she believes that what's happening right now is just a distraction. Folks, they're not distractions. It's the things that have to take place. They have to take place to put everything in motion. Everything has to be in place. They've got to do it now. So these things that are happening yesterday with Trump, listen, they cannot allow Trump to run. He cannot run. He cannot be in the election. These are the same group of people that in 1963 assassinated a sitting president, the FBI and the CIA. We found out that they did it. It was them. It wasn't J. Harvey Oswald. It wasn't the Cubans. It wasn't mafia. It was our own fucking government. The elites in our system, they did that. That's why they sealed that shit for 65 years. They didn't want you learning about it. They didn't want you knowing about what actually happened and what your government did to one of America's favorite presidents at that time. Do you remember how liked and loved John F. Kennedy was? Now, I wasn't crazy about his ideology. He had some personal problems that he had to work on. But America loved him. They adored the family. It was Camelot. We had finally ascended out of the dark ages. We were a leading power, and the elites took him out. And why did they take him out? Well, simple. He made a promise. What he said was, I'm going to take the CIA and I'm going to shatter it and scatter its ashes to the four corners of the earth, to the globe. So JFK said. A few months later, he was dead. And I don't think it was a few months later. But that's what Bobby Kennedy was going to be responsible for doing, was breaking up the CIA, redoing the FBI, because J. Edgar Hoover had too much power in the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover had been in there for 40 years, all the secrets and all that stuff. People, you've got to wake up to what's going on. These aren't distractions. These are actions that have to take place right now. It's no different than I gave the example last night of buying a home. I'm buying a home, or we're going to be looking for a home in Florida. But to get everything together, I've got to get approved for the amount that we want to get approved for. I've got to get all of our tax records together. All the bullshit that has to happen. Those aren't distractions. Those are the things that have to take place for me to buy a fucking home. They're not distractions. It's what it takes to do the job. They're not distractions. What we're watching on our news every night, it's not a distraction. What they're doing with the trannies and the LGBTQ plus and how you can't now speak out against them in Canada, that's not a distraction. That's what they're doing to shut you up. They've got to make it look like a group of people that need some help. So they'll steal that little part of your freedom of speech from you. They'll take it away from you and they'll say, you can't do that anymore. You can't talk about those people. They're protected. And then once the group becomes protected, guess what they become? Once you can't speak out against them, guess what they do? They take that inch that they've been given and they grow it into a fucking mile. Folks, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. When the San Francisco Men's Choir comes forward and says, we're coming for your kids, we're coming for your kids, we're coming for you, I believe them. When the elite of the planet say, we want you dead, we only want 500 million people walking the face of the earth, and they put things into practice that leads everyone to believe that they're trying to depopulate the planet. When rich people tell me they want me dead, I believe them, you should too. That being said, we're going to take a break. We're sponsored by Tusk Browser. If you haven't gotten yourself one, go get yourself one now, the Tusk Browser, tuskbrowser.com. They are now working on the Tusk search engine. You can actually get in on the ground floor. If you want to invest, you can learn all about that at wefunder.com/Tusk, tuskbrowser.com. Go get it. By conservatives for conservatives. We'll see if this actually works. I don't know if this is going to work or not. We've been messing with this for the last 2 weeks. We can't get this figured out. I don't think it's going to work. We'll see. Well, we'll try this one more time. There it goes. Here we go. Welcome back to the show. My name is Kramer. This is the CramerSez podcast. We do this every weekday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. You can join us on online at YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, and Twitch. And you can call in at 877-619-3899. Before the young man called in earlier, I was getting to Ray Dalio's Principles for Dealing with the Changing World. It's one of the most influential pieces that I think that he's created in the last several years. If you don't follow Ray, you might want to. Again, I don't know what his policies are. I don't know what his politics are, I should say. But what I do know is that the information that he's given here is spot on, and it gives you an insight into what's happening, why it's happening, and what we can expect. This is Ray Dalio's Principles for Dealing with the Changing World. Enjoy. See if we can get this up here and get it going. I'm sucking at this tonight.
The changing world order. The times ahead will be radically different from those that we've experienced in our lifetimes, though similar to many times before. How do I know that? Because they always have been. Over my roughly 50 years of global macroeconomic investing, I've learned the hard way that the most important events that surprised me did so because they never happened in my lifetime. These painful surprises led me to study the last 500 years of history for similar situations, where I saw that they had indeed happened many times before, with the ups and the downs of the Dutch, British, and U.S. empires. And every time they did, it was a sign of the changing world order. This study taught me valuable lessons that I'm going to pass along to you here in a distilled form. You can find the comprehensive version in my book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. Let me begin with a story that brought me to this point, about how I learned to anticipate the future by studying the past. In 1971, when I was a young clerk on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the United States ran out of money and defaulted on its debts. That's right, the U.S. ran out of money. How? Well, back then, gold was the money used in transactions between countries. Paper money, like the dollar, was like checks in a checkbook in that it had no value other than it could be exchanged for gold, which was the real money. At the time, the United States was spending a lot more money than it was earning by writing a lot more of these paper money checks than it had gold in the bank to exchange for them. As people turned these checks into the bank for gold money, the amount of gold in the U.S. started to dwindle. It soon became obvious that the U.S. couldn't keep its promises for all the existing paper money, so people holding dollars rushed to exchange them before the gold ran out. Recognizing that the U.S. was going to run out of real money, on Sunday evening, August 15th, President Nixon went on television to tell the world that the U.S. was breaking its promise to let people exchange their dollars for gold. Of course, he didn't say it that way. He said it more diplomatically, without making it clear that the United States was defaulting.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
I watched in awe, realizing that money as we understood it was ending. What a crisis. I expected the stock market to plunge the next day, so I got on the exchange floor early to prepare. When the opening bell rang, pandemonium broke out, but not the kind I expected. The market was up, way up, and went on to rise nearly 25%. That surprised me because I never experienced a currency devaluation before. When I dug into history, I discovered that the exact same thing happened in 1933 and had the exact same effect. Then, paper dollars were also linked to gold, which the U.S. was running out of because it was spending more paper money checks than it had gold to exchange for them. And President Roosevelt announced on the radio that he would break the country's promise to exchange dollars for gold.
It was then that I issued the proclamation providing for the National Bank holiday. And this was the first step in the government's reconstruction of our financial and economic fabric. The second step, last Thursday, was the legislation promptly and patriotically passed by the Congress, confirming my proclamation and broadening my powers so that it became possible, in view of the requirement of time, to extend the holiday and lift the ban of that holiday gradually in the days to come. This law also gave authority to develop a program for facilitation.
In both cases, breaking the link to gold allowed the U.S. to continue spending more than it earned, simply by printing more paper dollars. Since there was an increase in the number of dollars without an increase in the country's wealth, the value of each dollar fell. As these new dollars entered the market, without a corresponding increase in productivity, they went to buy lots of stocks, gold, and commodities, and hence caused their prices to rise. As I studied more history, I saw that the exact same thing happened many, many times before. I saw that since the beginning of time, when governments spent much more than they took in taxes, and conditions got bad, they ran out of money and they needed more. So they printed more, a lot more, which made its value fall and made the prices of most everything, including stocks, gold, and commodities, rise. That's when I first learned the principle that, When central banks print a lot of money to relieve a crisis, buy stocks, gold, and commodities because their value will rise and the value of paper money will fall. This printing of money is also what happened in 2008 to relieve the mortgage-driven debt crisis, and in 2020 to relieve the pandemic-driven economic crisis, and it almost certainly will happen in the future. So I suggest that you keep this principle in mind. These experiences gave me another principle, which is to understand what is coming at you, you need to understand what happened before you. That principle led me to study how the Roaring '20s bubble turned into the 1930s depression, which gave me the lessons that allowed me to anticipate and profit from the 2007 bubble, turning into the 2008 bust. All these experiences led me to develop an almost instinctual urge to look to the past for similar situations to learn how to handle the future well. Changing orders. Over the last few years, three big things that hadn't happened in my lifetime prompted me to do this study. First, countries didn't have enough money to pay their debts, even after lowering interest rates to zero. So their central banks began printing.
We headed towards digital superintelligence that...
Second, big internal conflicts emerged due to growing gaps in wealth and values. This showed up in political populism and polarization between the left, who want to redistribute wealth, and the right, who want to defend those holding the wealth. And third, increasing external conflict between a rising great power and the leading great power, as is now happening with China and the United States. So I looked back. I saw that all these had happened together before, many times, and nearly always led to changing domestic and world orders. The last time this sequence happened was from 1930 to 1945. What exactly is an order, you might ask? It's a governing system for people dealing with each other. There are internal orders for governing within countries, typically laid out in constitutions. And there is a world order for governing between countries, typically laid out in treaties. Internal orders change at different times than world orders, though whether within or between countries, these orders typically change after wars. Civil wars within countries, international wars between countries. They happen when revolutionary new forces defeat weak old orders. For example, the U.S. internal order was laid out in the Constitution in 1789 after the American Revolution, and it is still operating today, even after the American Civil War. Russia got rid of its old order and established a new one with the Russian Revolution in 1917, which ended in 1991 with a relatively bloodless revolution. China began its current internal order in 1949 when the Chinese Communist Party won the Civil War. You get the idea. The current world order, commonly called the American World Order, formed after the Allied victory in World War II, when the U.S. emerged as the dominant world power. It was set out in agreements and treaties for how global governance and monetary systems work. In 1944, the New World Monetary System was laid out in the Bretton Woods Agreement and established the dollar as the world's leading reserve currency. A reserve currency is a currency that is commonly accepted around the world, and having one is a key factor in a country becoming the richest and most powerful empire. With a new dominant power and monetary system established, a new world order begins. These changes take place in a timeless and universal cycle that I call the Big Cycle. I'll start with a quick overview. then give you a more complete version, and then direct you to my book if you want more. As I studied the 10 most powerful empires over the last 500 years and the last 3 reserve currencies, it took me through the rise and decline of the Dutch Empire and the guilder, the British Empire and the pound, the rise and early decline in the United States Empire and the dollar, and the decline and rise of the Chinese Empire and its currencies, as well as the rise and decline of the Spanish, German, French, Indian, Japanese, Russian, and Ottoman empires, along with their significant conflicts, as measured in this chart. To understand China's patterns better, I also studied the rise and fall of Chinese dynasties and their monies back to the year 600. Because looking at all these measures at once can be confusing, I'll focus on the 4 most important ones: the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese. You'll quickly notice the pattern. Now let's simplify the form a bit. As you can see, they transpired in overlapping cycles that lasted about 250 years, with 10 to 20-year transition periods between them. Typically, these transitions have been periods of great conflict because leading powers don't decline without a fight. So how am I measuring an empire's power? In this study, I used 8 metrics. Each country's measure of total power is derived by averaging them together. They are education, inventiveness and technology development, competitiveness in global markets, economic output, share of world trade, military strength, the power of their financial center for capital markets, and the strength of their currency as a reserve currency. Because these powers are measurable, we can see how strong each country is now, was in the past, and whether they're rising or declining. By examining the sequences from many countries, we can see how a typical cycle transpires. And because the wiggles can be confusing, we can simplify it a bit to focus on the pattern of cause-effect relationships that drive the rise and decline of a typical empire. As you can see, better education typically leads to increased innovation and technology development, and with a lag, the establishment of the currency as a reserve currency. You can also see that these forces then declined in a similar order, reinforcing each other's decline. Let's now look at the typical sequence of events going on inside a country that produces these rises and declines. In a nutshell, the big cycle typically begins after a major conflict, often a war, establishes the new leading power and the new world order. Because no one wants to challenge this power, a period of peace and prosperity typically follows. As people get used to this peace and prosperity, they increasingly bet on it continuing. They borrow money to do that, which eventually leads to a financial bubble. The empire's share of trade grows, and when most transactions are conducted in its currency, it becomes a reserve currency, which leads to even more borrowing. At the same time, this increased prosperity distributes wealth unevenly, so the wealth gap typically grows between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. Eventually, the financial bubble bursts, which leads to the printing of money and increased internal conflict between the rich and the poor, which leads to some form of revolution to redistribute wealth. This can happen peacefully or as a civil war. While the empire struggles with this internal conflict, its power diminishes relative to external rival powers on the rise. When a new rising power gets strong enough to compete with the dominant power that is having domestic breakdowns, external conflicts, most typically wars, take place. Out of these internal and external wars come new winners and losers. Then the winners get together to create the new world order. and the cycle begins again. As I looked back, I saw that these cause and effect relationships drove the cycles of rises and declines all the way back to the Roman Empire. I saw how the stories of each one of these cycles blended together with others before, during, and after, in the same way as each individual story blends with others to make the epic 500-year story that is our collective history. And like human life cycles, no two are exactly the same, but most are similar. They're driven by logical cause and effect relationships that progress through stages from birth to strength and maturity to weakness and inevitably decline. However, that's like saying a person's life cycle takes 80 years on average, without recognizing that many are much shorter and many are longer. While age can be a good indicator of future longevity, a better way is to look at health indicators. One can do that with empires and their vital signs too. I found that by watching the indicators of power change, I was able to see what stage a country was in, which helped me to anticipate what was likely to come next. Now, I'll take you through the big cycle in more detail. Give me 20 minutes and I'll give you the last 500 years of history and show you the similar patterns across the Dutch, British, US, and Chinese empires. 500 years of big cycles. I'm going to describe the typical cycle by dividing it into 3 phases: the rise, the top, and the decline. The rise. Successful new orders that rise, both internal and external, are typically started by powerful revolutionary leaders doing 4 things. First, they win power by gaining more support than the opposition. Second, they consolidate power by converting, weakening, or eliminating the opposition so they don't stand in their way. Third, they establish systems and institutions that make the country work well. And fourth, they pick their successors well, or create systems that do that. Because a great empire requires many great leaders over several generations. At this stage, soon after winning the fight, there is typically a period of peace and growing prosperity because the leadership is clearly dominant and has broad support, so no one wants to fight it. During this phase, leaders within the country have to design an excellent system to raise the country's wealth and power. First and foremost, to be great, they must have strong education, which is not just teaching knowledge and skills, but also strong character, civility, and work ethic. These are typically taught in the family, schools, and religious institutions. That provides a healthy respect for rules and laws, order within society, low corruption, and enables them to unite behind a common purpose and work well together. As they do this, they increasingly shift from producing basic products to innovating and inventing new technologies. For example, the Dutch rose to defeat the Habsburg Empire and become superbly educated. They became so inventive that they came up with 1/4 of all major inventions in the world, the most important of which was the invention of ships that could travel around the world to collect great riches, and the invention of capitalism, as we know it today, to finance those voyages. They, like all leading empires, enhanced their thinking by being open to the best thinking in the world. As a result, the people in the country become more productive and more competitive in world markets, which shows up in their growing economic output and rising share of world trade. You can see this happening now as the US and China are roughly comparable in both their economic outputs and their shares of world trade. As countries trade more globally, they must protect their trade routes and their foreign interests from attack, so they develop great military strength. If done well, This virtuous cycle leads to strong income growth, which can be used to finance investments in education, infrastructure, and research and development. They must also develop systems to incentivize and empower those that have the ability to make or take wealth. In all of these cases, the most successful empires used a capitalist approach to develop productive entrepreneurs. Even China, which is run by the Chinese Communist Party, used a form of this capitalist approach. Deng Xiaoping, when asked about this, said, "It doesn't matter if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice. And it's glorious to be rich." To do this well, they must develop their capital markets. Most importantly, their lending, bond, and stock markets. That allows people to convert their savings into investments to fund invention and development, and share in the successes of those who make great things happen. The Dutch created the first publicly listed company, the Dutch East India Company, and the first stock market to fund it, which were integral parts of the system that produced massive wealth and power. As a natural consequence, the greatest empires developed the world's leading financial centers for attracting and distributing the world's capital. Amsterdam was the world's financial center when the Dutch were preeminent. London, when the British were on top. New York is now, and China is quickly developing its financial centers. Most importantly, the capitalists, the governments, and the military must work together. Not only did the Dutch work well together, they were one and the same. The Dutch East India Company was granted a trade monopoly from the government and had its own officially sanctioned military to go out into the global markets to make and take wealth. The British followed with the British East India Company and had a similar coordination of their government, business, and military operations. The U.S. military-industrial complex followed suit, as does the Chinese system today. As the country becomes the largest international trading empire, its transactions can be paid with its currency, making it the preferred global medium of exchange. And because their currency is so widely accepted and frequently used, people around the world want to save in it, making it the preferred storehold of wealth, and thus the world's leading reserve currency. The guilder was the world's main reserve currency when the Dutch led world trade, the pound was when the British led, and the dollar has been since the US led. Naturally, China's currency is increasingly being used as a reserve currency. Having a reserve currency enables the empire to borrow more than other countries. That advantage is huge. Think about it. People all over the world are eager to save and hence lend back their currency to the empire. Countries without a reserve currency don't have that. And when the empire runs out of its own money, remember the United States in 1971? They can always print more. The exorbitant privilege afforded by the empire's reserve currency leads borrowing to increase and the beginning of a financial bubble. This series of cause and effect relationships leading to mutually supportive financial, political, and military powers, bolstered by the borrowing power of a reserve currency, have gone together since history began to be recorded. All the empires that became the most powerful in the world followed this path to the top. While in the top phase, most of these strengths are sustained, embedded within the fruits of their success are the seeds of their decline. As a rule, as people in these rich and powerful countries earn more, That makes them more expensive and less competitive relative to people in other countries who are willing to work for less. At the same time, people in other countries naturally copy the methods and technologies of the leading power, which further reduces the leading power's competitiveness. For example, British shipbuilders had less expensive workers than Dutch shipbuilders. So they hired Dutch designers to design better ships that were built by less expensive British workers, making them more competitive, which led the British to rise and the Dutch to decline. Also, as people become richer, they tend not to work as hard. They enjoy more leisure, pursue the finer and less productive things in life, and at the extreme become decadent. Values change from generation to generation during the rise to the top, from those who had to fight to achieve wealth and power to those who inherited it. They're less battle-hardened, steeped in luxuries, and accustomed to the easy life, which makes them more vulnerable to challenges. The golden era of the Dutch Empire and the Victorian era of the British Empire were such high prosperity periods like this. As people get used to doing well, they increasingly bet on the good times continuing and borrow money to do that, which grows into financial bubbles. Naturally, the financial gains come unevenly, so the wealth gap grows. Wealth gaps are self-reinforcing because rich people use their greater resources to reinforce their powers. For example, they give greater privileges to their children, like better education, and they influence the political system to their advantage. This causes the gaps in values, politics, and opportunities to grow between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. And opportunities. Those who are less well off feel the system is unfair, so resentments grow. But as long as the living standards of most people are still rising, these gaps and resentments don't boil over into conflict. Having the world's reserve currency inevitably leads to borrowing excessively and contributes to the country building up large debts with foreign lenders. While this boosts spending power over the short term, it weakens the country's financial health and weakens the currency over the long term. In other words, when borrowing and spending are strong, the empire appears very strong, but its finances are in fact being weakened. The borrowing sustains the country's power beyond its fundamentals by financing both domestic overconsumption and international military conflicts required to maintain the empire. Inevitably, the cost of maintaining and defending the empire becomes greater than the revenue it brings in, so having an empire becomes unprofitable. For example, the Dutch Empire overextended around the world and fought war after increasingly expensive war with the British and other European powers to protect its territory and trade routes. The British Empire similarly became massive, bureaucratic, and lost its competitive advantages as rival powers, particularly Germany, soared, leading to an increasingly expensive arms race and World War. The U.S. has spent about $8 trillion on foreign wars and their consequences since September 11, and trillions more for other military operations and for supporting military bases in 70 countries. And it still isn't spending enough to support its military competition with China in the area around China. In this cycle, the richer countries eventually get deeper into debt by borrowing from poorer countries that save more. It's one of the early signs of a wealth and power shift. This started in the United States in the 1980s when it had a per capita income 40 times that of China's and started borrowing from Chinese who wanted to save in dollars because the dollar was the world's reserve currency. Similarly, the British borrowed a lot of money from its much poorer colonies, and the Dutch did the same at their top. If the empire begins to run out of new lenders, Those holding their currency begin to look to sell and get out rather than to buy, save, lend, and get in. And the strength of the empire begins to decline. The decline. The decline comes from internal economic weakness together with internal fighting or costly external fighting or both. Typically, the decline comes gradually and then very suddenly. When debts become very large and there is an economic downturn and the empire can no longer borrow the money necessary to repay its debts, the financial bubble bursts. This creates great domestic hardships and forces the country to choose between defaulting on its debts or printing a lot of new money. It always chooses to print a lot of new money, at first gradually and eventually massively. That devalues the currency and raises inflation. For the Dutch, this was the financial crisis brought about by financial excesses and paying for the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War. Similarly, for the British, it was paying for its financial excesses and its debts from the two world wars. And for the U.S., it's been 3 cycles of debt finance booms and busts since the 90s, with the central bank stepping in each time with stronger measures. When the government has problems funding itself, when there are bad economic conditions, and living standards for most people are declining, and there are large wealth, values, and political gaps, internal conflict between the rich and the poor, as well as different ethnic, religious, and racial groups, greatly increases. This leads to political extremism that shows up as populism of the left or the right. Those of the left seek to redistribute the wealth, while those of the right seek to maintain the wealth in the hands of the rich. Typically, during such times, taxes on the rich rise, and when the rich fear their wealth and well-being will be taken away, they move to places, assets, and currencies they feel safer in. These outflows reduce the empire's tax revenue, which leads to a classic, self-reinforcing, hollowing out process. When the flight of wealth gets bad enough, governments outlaw it. Those seeking to get out begin to panic. These turbulent conditions undermine productivity, which shrinks the economic pie and causes more conflict about how to divide the shrinking resources. Populist leaders emerge from both sides and pledge to take control and bring about order. That's when democracy is most challenged because it fails to control the anarchy. And it is when the move to a strong populist leader who will bring order to the chaos is most likely. As conflict within the country escalates, it leads to some form of revolution or civil war to redistribute wealth and force the necessary big changes. This can be peaceful and maintain the existing order, but it's more often violent and changes the order. For example, the Roosevelt Revolution to redistribute wealth was relatively peaceful and maintained the existing internal order, while the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the Chinese Revolution were much more violent and led to new internal orders. This internal conflict and the Chinese Revolution were much more violent, rising external rivals who, seeing this domestic weakness, are more inclined to mount a challenge. This raises the risk of great international conflict, especially if the rival has built up a comparable military. Defending oneself and one's empire against rivals requires great military spending, which has to occur as domestic economic conditions are deteriorating and the empire can least afford it. Since there is no viable system for peacefully adjudicating international disputes, these conflicts are typically resolved through tests of power. As bolder challenges are made, the leading empire is faced with the difficult choice of fighting or retreating. Fighting and losing is the worst outcome. But retreating is bad too, as it cedes progress to the rival and signals that the empire is weak to those countries that are considering which side to be on. Poor economic conditions cause more fighting for wealth and power, which inevitably leads to some kind of war. Wars are terribly costly. At the same time, they produce the tectonic shifts that realign the new waters to the new realities of wealth and power in the world. When those holding the reserve currency and debt of the declining empire lose faith and sell them, that marks the end of its big cycle. Of the roughly 750 currencies that existed since 1700, less than 20% now exist, and all of them have been devalued. For the Dutch, this happened after their defeat in the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War, when they weren't able to repay the massive debts they built up during it. This led to a run on the Bank of Amsterdam and a desperate sell-off, forcing massive money printing, which devalued the currency and the empire into irrelevance. For the British, this happened after World War II, when despite their victory, they could not repay the massive debts they borrowed to fund their war effort. This led to a series of money printing, devaluations, and sell-offs in the British pound as the US and the dollar emerged dominant and created a new world order. At the time of this recording, the United States hasn't yet reached this point. While it has massive debt, spends more than it earns, and funds this deficit with more borrowing and printing huge amounts of new money, the big sell-off in dollars and dollar debt hasn't yet begun. And while there are great internal and external conflicts occurring for all the classic reasons, they've not yet crossed the line to become wars. Eventually, out of these conflicts, whether they're violent or not, come new winners who get together and restructure the losers' debts and political systems and establish the new world order. Then the old cycle and empire ends and the new one begins, and they do it all over again. That's a lot of detail I just threw at you to paint a picture of how the typical big cycle transpires. Of course, not all of them transpire in exactly this way, but most largely do. So much so that it seems like the stories of rises and declines stay essentially the same, and the only things that change are the clothes the characters wear and the technologies they use. So, where are we heading? The future. Most empires have their time in the sun and inevitably decline. Reversing a decline is difficult because that requires undoing a lot that's already been done, but it's possible. By looking at these indicators, it's pretty easy to see which stage of the big cycle an empire is in, how fit it is, and whether its condition is improving or worsening, which can help one estimate how many years it has left. Still, these estimates aren't precise, and the cycle can be extended if those in charge pay attention to their vital signs and improve them. For example, knowing that a person is 60 years old, how fit they are, whether they smoke or not, and a few other basic vital signs, one can estimate the person's longevity. One can do that with empires and their vital signs too. It won't be precise, but it will be broadly indicative and give clear direction on steps to take to increase longevity. It's most often the case that a nation's greatest war is with itself over whether or not it can make the hard decisions needed to sustain success. As for what we need to do, it comes down to just two things: earn more than we spend and treat each other well. All other things I mentioned, strong education, inventiveness, being competitive, and all the rest, are just ways of getting at these two things. It's easy to measure if we're doing them. So like people who want to get fit, let's get on the program and improve our vitals. Let's do that individually and collectively. My goal for sharing this picture of how the world works and a few principles for dealing with it well is to help you recognize where we are and the challenges we face, and to make the wise decisions needed to navigate these times well. Since there is a lot more to discuss and we are out of time, you can learn more in my book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, and I look forward to continuing this conversation at economicprinciples.org and on social media. Thank you, and may the force of evolution be with you.
So how'd you like that? Huh? Sound familiar? Did Ray outline exactly what's going on? You see, the thing that you don't understand, living in your home in middle America, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, whatever, what you don't realize is that the elite are fully aware of what's going on. So these distractions that we keep being told about, these things that we keep being told that are distractions to make us forget what's going on, these are the things that have to be put in place so this shit can happen. They know what's happening. They've designed and defined a date. 2030 is what they wanted to go with. That was the 2030 agenda. We're going to do everything by 2030. They're moving it up to 2027. So everything that you just heard Ray talk about, what he described and how this has happened time and time again, they know the cycles as well. They know how to leverage what's happening. That's why they're in Ukraine. Because what he said here many, many times over, we've heard it since the Bush days, the term New World Order. New World Orders are not new. Hopefully that's what you took away tonight. And what you can see is that if we do not act, if you and I do not stand up, if we don't start making our voices heard, we're going to be in a civil war in this nation. It's how it always happens. Well, Kramer, it didn't happen with Roosevelt back in the 30s. We didn't also have the situation that we've had over the last several years. You see, they had the Depression. They were utilizing that as the weapon. They tried to do a pandemic because they couldn't push a depression because they didn't want to. But now they are. Recession, depression, they don't care. As long as you relent power to them, that's what it's all about. Folks, you've got to get involved. I request that you sign up at CramerSez.com. If you don't already have an account, go get yourself one. You can build groups. You can build community there. It's the starting thing. Is it perfect? It is not perfect. But CramerSez is just like our nation. We are working toward a more perfect solution. With that being said, I'm going to call it quits tonight. We had a great show. I appreciate the calls early on. Tomorrow night, full-blown show. We've got a lot of content coming tomorrow night. But tonight I wanted to let you guys see some of the content that I view on a regular basis. I've probably watched that video, I don't know, it's 40 minutes long. I've probably watched that 10, 15, 20 times. I'll have it on in the background. I don't just sit there and watch it, but I'll have it on the background just to remind me of some of the things that's happened. Ray's got a great series. If you haven't watched what he does on YouTube, go check him out. Again, I don't know the man's politics. He doesn't talk about him much in the content that I've seen. But the information that he's given, just like the video that you just saw, hopefully opened your eyes as to what's going on. These people, they keep saying, well, we don't know what's going on. They know exactly what's going on. These are not distractions. These are the plans for the next step in the New World Order. Do you want to live in a new world order? Do you want to live in their new plan where you will own nothing and be happy? If you don't, then now's the time to speak up. If you do, don't do shit. They'll do it all for you. That's the show for tonight. My name is Kramer. This is the CramerSez podcast. We will be back tomorrow night, or as soon as we can. We'll see you. I'll get it out. We'll see you then.
CramerSez.com. CramerSez.com.